Erased identity. My teacher pulled me aside after class and said, "You're not safe at home. Come with me now." The last bell rang, and Miss Albright grabbed my arm, her expression saying everything I didn't want to hear. "We have to leave immediately, Hannah," she whispered, the panic in her voice sharper than anything I'd ever heard. For 3 years, Miss Albright had been my history teacher, known for her ice-cold composure and strictly professional demeanor. She didn't hug students. She didn't offer personal advice. She managed her classroom with the precision of a drill sergeant. Yet, here she was, clutching my forearm tightly as the rest of the student body surged toward the lunchtime rush. I tried to yank my arm away, startled by the unexpected touch. Her grip only tightened, digging into my skin, pulling me back towards the shadows near her filing cabinet. The noise of the crowded hallway seemed to amplify the silence around us, isolating us completely. "I need you to listen to me, sweetie. Your home is not secure." "We are leaving now," she insisted. Her eyes were wide, and the usual severe lines around her mouth were twitching with uncontrolled stress. I was 17, and like most teenagers, I believed I could instantly detect adult exaggeration or unwarranted drama. Sure, my parents had loud arguments occasionally, and Dad had a short fuse when stressed. But wasn't that standard family life? Every home had tension, didn't it? Miss Albright's face was ghostly pale. Her usual flawless control had vanished, replaced by a raw, naked terror. She snatched her coat and bag with her free hand, still maintaining that almost painful hold on my wrist. This was not a discussion. This was an extraction. I stumbled along behind her as she moved toward the rear door of the classroom, her urgency escalating into near violence. "Miss Albright, stop. I have trigonometry next period. We can't just walk out," I protested, my voice cracking high with mounting confusion and burgeoning fear. She didn't respond, just dragged me into the deserted side corridor that led to the staff parking lot exit. Other educators were visible through open doorways, calmly preparing for the afternoon, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding just feet away. She was breathing heavily, as if she'd been running a marathon, and I noticed the distinct tremble in her hand securing my arm. We burst through the exit into the harsh glare of a late autumn sun. She steered me toward a slightly battered gray sedan parked among the faculty vehicles. Fumbling only slightly, she unlocked the car and practically shoved me into the passenger seat before scrambling to the driver's side. The engine roared to life, and we were peeling out of the lot before my brain could fully register the sequence of events. Before I could demand sensible explanations or threaten to scream for help, my history teacher had effectively abducted me from school during broad daylight. "You must contact my mother and father immediately, or I'm dialing the police," I demanded, reaching for my cell phone buried deep within my oversized backpack. Miss Albright's hand shot out like a striking viper, snatching my wrist again, this time hard enough to bring tears to my eyes. Her gaze locked onto mine, and the sight was chilling. Pure, unadulterated fear mingled with resolute intent and something darker, a profound sorrow. She held the connection for maybe 3 endless seconds before focusing again on the road ahead, her jaw clenched so tight the muscles pulsed visibly. "Your mother contacted the main office this morning," she finally articulated, her voice surprisingly steady despite the inherent tremor. "She informed the principal you were being immediately withdrawn. The stated reason was an abrupt, out-of-state relocation for your father's job, meaning you would not return. The principal signed the release forms instantly. Everything appeared officially sanctioned, the documents perfectly filed. But Hannah, your mother also submitted a withdrawal sheet for your younger sister, Eliza. Your sister who passed away 5 years ago." The world seemed to lurch violently, and I grabbed the door handle for stability. Eliza had tragically drowned in our backyard swimming pool when she was 7, when I was 12. An accident that ripped the foundations out from under our family, creating wounds that never fully healed. My parents had erected an unwritten rule. Eliza's name was never spoken aloud. Her bedroom remained untouched, a silent shrine, and at dinner we maintained the pretense that there wasn't a terrible void where my little sister belonged. Hearing Miss Albright utter her name felt like a sacrilege, as if she'd reached directly into my chest and grasped something intensely personal and sacred. Grief is a weapon wielded in silence. That makes 0 sense. Mom would never complete paperwork using Eliza's name. She can barely breathe when someone mentions her. You are completely mistaken about this. It has to be wrong. But even as I offer the denial, a creeping sense of unease began to consume my certainty. Mom had been behaving strangely all week, random bouts of weeping, excessive, desperate embraces, saying, "I love you more than anything," with an unsettling desperation. Dad had been clocking extremely late hours, arriving after I was asleep and leaving before dawn, subtly avoiding any interaction. Ms. Albright executed a sharp turn, and I realized we were leaving the city limits, heading toward the main freeway. I have been educating teenagers for 20 years now. I recognize behavioral patterns, she explained, her focus absolute on the road. Parents frequently pull students out suddenly, citing ambiguous explanations about moving or new opportunities. Often it's entirely benign, just standard relocation. But sometimes there are clear warning signs signaling something much deeper. Your mother filed documents for a deceased child, Hannah. That is not a simple mistake or a clerical mishap. That signifies a parent dissociating from reality, attempting to obliterate the past, or, most terrifyingly, actively planning something catastrophic. My phone vibrated violently in my hand. I glanced down, 4 missed calls from Mom and a text message that instantly tied my stomach into knots. *, where are you? Return immediately. We must discuss an important family matter. *, I showed the message to Ms. Albright, and her face drained of the last vestiges of color. She floored the accelerator, the speedometer vaulting past 75 as we merged onto the northbound lanes. "I need outside intervention," Ms. Albright muttered, addressing herself more than me. "I must contact authorities who can genuinely assist us. But if I alert the police right now, they will simply mandate your return home. You are a legal minor. Your parents possess full custody. There is zero physical evidence of immediate peril. Just my intuition, relying on flawed paperwork that is easily dismissed as bureaucratic error. We need sufficient time to confirm what is truly happening before anyone forces you back into a potentially lethal situation." I desperately wanted to argue, to insist she was wildly overreacting, that despite their palpable grief and peculiar behavior, my parents would never harm me. But Eliza's sweet face materialized in my mind, her joyous smile on the morning before the terrible incident. The piercing scream Mom let loose when she found her floating motionlessly in the pool. Something intrinsic broke within my parents that day, a fundamental piece of their sanity that never mended. What if Ms. Albright was correct? What if the intense psychological darkness that had resided in our home since Eliza's death was finally consuming everything? My father's name flashed on the screen as he called. I stared at the display, my thumb hovering over the accept icon. Ms. Albright shot me a firm, silencing glance. "Do not answer yet. Not until we grasp the gravity of this situation." The phone rang ceaselessly 4 more times, then ceased, immediately followed by a text message from Dad. "Call now, all caps." 2 words heavy with implied urgency. We continued driving for nearly half an hour before Ms. Albright exited the highway and pulled into the secluded corner of a remote roadside parking area. She shut off the car, sitting rigid, gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles shone white with tension. When she finally spoke, her voice was unervingly measured. "I am about to share something that may sound completely ludicrous, but you must hear the entirety of it before reacting. Can you promise me that?" I nodded silently, my pulse pounding so violently I felt it choking my breath. 3 weeks ago, your mother requested a meeting with me after school hours. She claimed she wanted to review your academic progress, which was strange since you maintain a perfect GPA, and parents don't generally schedule discussions for thriving students. But she insisted it was absolutely necessary, so I consented. "Hannah, she didn't inquire about your grades or homework assignments. She asked extremely precise questions about you, your interactions with peers, your overall happiness level, whether you ever expressed feeling vulnerable or afraid at home." Ms. Albright turned fully to face me, her gaze intense and penetrating. "Then 2 days ago," she returned. This time, she was significantly different, more frantic, highly distressed. She asked me if I believed genuine redemption was possible for grave mistakes, if someone who had committed something truly awful could ever truly right the wrong. She was weeping hysterically, repeating that she had failed one daughter and could not bear to fail another. I tried desperately to encourage her to clarify her meaning, but she simply fled, practically running out of my classroom. That's when I began paying very close attention to your family circumstances. My mouth felt instantly parched, and my hands started trembling uncontrollably. What exactly did you discover? Ms. Albright pulled out her phone and navigated to a browser displaying search engine results for my family's current surname. The initial results were standard news reports from 5 years ago regarding Eliza's tragic demise, the swimming accident that stunned our quiet neighborhood. But then she showed me other articles she had meticulously archived, much older pieces dating from before our arrival in this community, concerning a separate family operating under different names, yet featuring the exact same faces in the accompanying photographs. Your parents are not operating under their birth identities, Ms. Albright stated softly. The names they use presently are different from the names they utilized 7 years ago when they resided in California. Back then, they were known as Daniel and Sharon Kessler, and they had 2 daughters, Eliza and a girl named Clara, who would be approximately your age now. There was a chilling absence of public records concerning Clara after their move. No death certificate existed, nor a missing person filing. She simply vanished from all official documentation. And 6 months following that erasure, Daniel and Sharon Kessler transformed into Richard and Carolyn Hayes in Washington State, complete with 2 daughters, Eliza and Hannah. The sheer scale of this information was too enormous to process. It felt fundamentally impossible. That cannot be accurate. I remember my entire childhood. I distinctly recall being Hannah Hayes. I remember birthday celebrations, school pictures, and family trips. Yet, even as the protest left my lips, a profound disturbance was occurring within my memory. Illogical gaps started clicking into a new, terrifying alignment. I could vividly recall Eliza's 7th birthday party, but my memory of my own 8th birthday that very same year was curiously hazy. I remember the concept of starting 5th grade, but the granular details felt distant, like recalling a fabricated narrative somebody else had recounted to me, rather than actual lived experiences. Ms. Albright presented more archival reports, further evidence she had diligently gathered, faded photographs of the Kessler family, where the mother and father were unmistakably my parents, despite different hairstyles and slightly older appearances. Photos featuring 2 young girls resembling Eliza and me, labeled in the captions as Eliza and Clara Kessler. The older girl possessed my eyes and my smile, but her hair was a lighter shade, and her posture was subtly different, less confident, almost habitually hunched, as if trying to occupy the absolute minimum amount of physical space. I strongly suspect something terrible happened to Clara, Ms. Albright hypothesized, her voice gentle despite the horrific nature of her words. I believe your parents committed an act that forced them to flee and entirely redefine themselves under new aliases. And they have been existing under the crushing weight of that guilt for 7 years, desperately trying to deny its existence. When Eliza died in the pool accident, it completely shattered whatever precarious stability they had managed to construct. Your mother initiating withdrawal forms for both you and Eliza suggests she is planning a significant event that encompasses both her daughters, the living one and the one who is gone. My phone rang again. Mom. I watched it vibrate on the passenger seat until the call transferred to voicemail. 30 seconds later, a text appeared. Hannah, dearest, please answer your phone. We are so incredibly concerned about your well-being. Your teacher had absolutely no right to remove you from school. We are notifying the authorities if you do not come home immediately. The wording appeared perfectly normal, the worried tone of responsible parenting. But I kept fixating on that withdrawal document bearing Eliza's name, and the disturbing, desperate quality of Mom's recent embraces, feeling acutely like final farewells. What do you believe their plan entails? I managed to ask, my voice thin and laced with dread. Miss Albright's expression was deeply pained as she responded. I fear your mother intends to fully reunite her family, embracing both daughters. I believe she has been preparing some form of murder-suicide scenario to join Eliza wherever she believes Eliza resides now. And I think your father either tacitly supports her plan or is utterly paralyzed, unable to intervene. His constant avoidance of home might be his way of escaping the inevitable climax. The accusation was immense, overwhelming, and utterly repugnant to accept. My parents were undoubtedly grieving, broken, and eccentric, but they weren't homicidal maniacs. They couldn't possibly be planning to execute me just to achieve some twisted reunion with my deceased sibling. Except, Mom had been subtly distributing her valuable jewelry over the last week, insisting I keep her favorite locket and her wedding band because of their deep sentimental importance. Dad had unexpectedly sat me down last Saturday and stated that I was the most beautiful thing that had ever occurred in his life. He apologized for his perceived failings as a father and declared his boundless, incomprehensible love for me. Were those simply expressions of affection? Or were they meticulously planned final statements? The words of parents keenly aware their time was severely limited. "We must drive straight to the police station right now," I insisted, reaching for my seatbelt clasp. "We need to disclose every single detail, and they can help us discern reality from delusion." But Miss Albright grabbed my arm again, her grasp reflecting sheer desperation. "Hannah, I contacted the police yesterday. I articulated my severe concerns regarding the withdrawal documents, the name changes, and the suspicious conduct. They informed me that unless there was irrefutable evidence of immediate danger to you, they could not launch an investigation based solely on speculation. They reiterated that parents hold the right to withdraw their children from school and modify their identities if they choose, and none of my accumulated facts constituted sufficient grounds for intervention. They specifically instructed me that if I persisted in making unsupported claims, I risked being formally charged with harassment. How could the truth be so obviously dangerous, yet so legally useless? I stared at her, absorbing the astonishing admission. "So, you kidnapped me as the alternative? You physically seized me from school and drove me out of state because the police refused to believe your theory." Ms. Albright visibly winced at the loaded term, kidnapped, but offered no denial. "I could not, in good conscience, permit you to return home. Not when every single instinct screamed that your life hung in the balance. I have dedicated enough time to teaching to instinctively trust those gut feelings. Yes, I might be gravely mistaken. Yes, this entire situation could be a colossal misunderstanding, potentially costing me my professional career and resulting in serious criminal charges. But if I am correct, and I chose inaction, you would be dead." My phone was now ringing relentlessly. Simultaneous calls from both parents overlaid with rapid-fire text messages. *, we adore you so much. Please come home. *, we absolutely must discuss Eliza. That final text made me gasp. We never discussed Eliza. That was the solemn, unspoken covenant that prevented our family unit from imploding entirely. If they were now willing to breach that silence, something fundamental had definitely shifted. Ms. Albright restarted the engine and merged back onto the highway, moving north without any discernible specific destination. "I have a professional acquaintance who works in child protective services in the next state over. She has tentatively agreed to meet with us and assess the situation. She might be able to find legal grounds for emergency intervention. It's a 3-hour drive, but it represents the only viable option I can conceive of that ensures your safety while we attempt to untangle this entire mess. I truly need you to place your trust in me, Hannah. I know this is terrifying and utterly bewildering, but you must believe that I am acting because I possess a genuine, terrifying conviction that your life is currently at risk." I looked at this woman, who had taught me history for 3 years, who had praised my detailed essays and fostered my academic curiosity, and who had always remained strictly professional and deeply kind. She was wagering her entire existence on a mere hunch, rooted in bureaucratic paperwork, vintage news articles, and a powerful, dreadful gut feeling that something was irrevocably wrong. Either she was fundamentally right, and my parents were plotting to kill me, or she was disastrously wrong, having just destroyed her career and potentially incurred kidnapping felony charges by stealing me from school property. There was no comfortable middle ground where this outcome concluded favorably for her. "Why are you undertaking this risk?" I asked. "Why risk everything? Your job, your freedom, for a student you hardly know outside of class?" Ms. Albright's hands tightened convulsively on the steering wheel, and her voice became rough, strained with the emotion she had desperately suppressed. "Because 8 years ago, at a different school, I had another student who exhibited warning signs that I chose to ignore, parents who abruptly isolated her, sudden behavioral regressions, subtle hints that conditions at home were deteriorating. I convinced myself I was merely overreacting, that it wasn't my assigned duty to interfere in private family matters. 3 weeks later, her father murdered her, her mother, and subsequently killed himself. I have lived with that agonizing guilt every single day since, constantly questioning if I could have intervened, if I had simply acted on my instincts instead of worrying about professional boundaries. The confession hung thick in the confined air, and I suddenly understood the full stakes. This wasn't merely about protecting me. This was Miss Albright's desperate attempt to save the student she had previously failed, a conscious effort to rewrite history by safeguarding me from a perceived danger that might, ultimately, be entirely illusory. But what if it wasn't illusory? What if my parents' grief had finally metastasized and completely consumed their judgment? What if they genuinely concluded the only path to salvation was to eradicate their current lives and start anew where they pathologically believed Eliza was awaiting them? My phone buzzed with a new incoming text, this time from an unfamiliar number. Asterisk, this is Detective Silas Quinn, County Sheriff's Department. Your parents have formally reported you missing and have named your teacher as a likely kidnapper. We are currently tracking your device location using mobile signal data. For your immediate safety, please respond and confirm whether you are being unlawfully held against your will, asterisk. I showed the message to Ms. Albright, watching her face visibly crumble. They had escalated the situation far faster than she had anticipated. They had immediately involved high-level law enforcement, who would now treat this incident as a definite kidnapping, which, technically, it absolutely was. I have to switch off my phone immediately, I stated, already pressing the power button before Ms. Albright could offer resistance. If they are accurately tracking its location, they will successfully find us long before we reach your friend, and then everything will be entirely over. Ms. Albright gazed at me, a flicker of genuine hope illuminating her exhausted eyes. You trust me? You genuinely think I am right about your parents' intentions? I couldn't articulate what I genuinely believed, but I knew that specific text from Mom about needing to discuss Eliza felt profoundly wrong in a way that defied simple explanation. I knew my parents' conduct throughout the past week had been disturbingly odd, noticeable even to my adolescent self, and I recognized Miss Albright was jeopardizing her entire future because she was absolutely convinced I faced mortal peril. I believe that you genuinely believe it, I stated carefully, and that conviction is enough for me for now. We continued our journey in unsettling silence for another hour. Two solitary women, running from a danger that was perhaps purely imaginary, or perhaps the most terrifyingly real threat in the known universe. Miss Albright obsessively checked her rearview mirror, expecting police cruisers to materialize at any second. Her anxiety permeated the vehicle, a palpable, suffocating force, until I found myself scanning the mirrors too, flinching nervously at every vehicle that approached too closely. Around 2 p.m., Ms. Albright pulled into a nondescript filling station and used stored cash to purchase gasoline, deliberately avoiding any traceable electronic transactions. While she was occupied at the pump, I used the restroom and stared intently at my reflection in the grimy mirror above the sink. I appeared exactly like Hannah Hayes, a 17-year-old high school junior with medium brown hair and my father's distinctively shaped nose. But what if I wasn't? What if I was, in fact, Clara Kessler, a girl who had effectively vanished from all official documentation 7 years ago, whose identity had been meticulously erased and artificially substituted with someone else? How could I rely on the veracity of my own memories when Miss Albright had provided compelling evidence suggesting my entire past might be a meticulously constructed fabrication? I thought intensely about the faint, linear scars running along my left forearm. I had always been told they resulted from a disastrous bicycle accident when I was 10, but I could not recall the details of the incident itself, only the resulting scars. I thought about the distinct lack of childhood friends from before we moved to this community when I was 11, no ongoing relationships, no pen pal connections, no one from my supposed earlier life. I thought about how my parents steadfastly refused to display any photographs from my early infancy, always asserting they had been tragically lost during the complex relocation process. All of it could logically be attributed to innocent coincidence, or all of it could be damning evidence that I had definitively existed as someone else before assuming the role of Hannah Hayes. When I exited the cramped restroom, Ms. Albright was standing next to the sedan, speaking urgently into her phone. She abruptly ended the call the moment she spotted me, and her expression immediately hardened into grim disappointment. My contact in family services states she needs more than abstract theories and old news articles to warrant emergency intervention. Ms. Albright reported defeated. She requires tangible evidence of imminent danger or a verified witness statement detailing abuse. Without that critical proof, if we appear with you, she will have no lawful choice but to legally return you to your parents' custody, and I will be immediately arrested for kidnapping. The weight of that devastating realization settled over us both as we re-entered the car. Miss Albright had placed all her hope on this contingency plan, and it was rapidly disintegrating before we could even execute it. What course of action do we pursue now? I asked, and she met my gaze with eyes that were red-rimmed and utterly exhausted. I don't know. I genuinely believed I was saving you, but perhaps I am only compounding the crisis. Maybe I should transport you directly to the police station and meticulously explain everything, hoping they understand my intentions were benevolent. But a powerful resistance surged within me, rejecting the notion of returning home to parents who had been enacting subtle, terrifying farewells that I had been too naive to recognize. No, I stated resolutely. Something fundamentally wrong is happening in my house. I can feel it clearly now that you've exposed the possibilities. My parents have been behaving as though they are running out of scheduled time, as if they are preparing for some final irreversible act. We just need to locate concrete proof of their intentions before the police legally compel my return home. Ms. Albright regarded me with a blend of shock and something akin to admiration. What kind of proof are we seeking? I immediately thought of Eliza's bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been left. A meticulously maintained shrine to unbearable loss that my parents tended with obsessive devotion. My sister's room. My parents never allow anyone to enter there. They keep the door locked. But Mom has the primary key on her personal keychain, and there is a spare discreetly hidden inside her antique jewelry box. If their planning involves Eliza, there might be evidence concealed in that room. Letters, written plans, anything that articulates their current state of mind. We absolutely cannot illegally break into your family's residence, Hannah. That is a serious felony offense and would permanently obliterate whatever shred of credibility I have left. But I could see her actively considering the possibility, carefully balancing the severe risks against the potentially life-saving reward. Unless, she paused, formulating the rationalization slowly. We possessed explicit permission from a resident. Do you possess a key to your family home? I nodded and extracted my house key from a small zippered compartment in my backpack. Then you are not breaking in, Ms. Albright declared, seizing the logic. You are entering your own legal residence to safely retrieve your personal possessions. If I accompany you as your dedicated teacher, expressing concern for your welfare, we are simply ensuring you acquire what you require. The logic was laughably porous, easily dismantled in any legal venue, but desperation was rapidly pushing both of us toward risks we would never contemplate under normal circumstances. Ms. Albright quickly executed a U-turn and drove back toward the town limits, back toward my house, where my parents might be waiting patiently or might be actively scouring the area for us. We realistically had perhaps 30 minutes before law enforcement expected us to surface somewhere, before the full-scale manhunt escalated beyond simple phone tracking. We arrived in my neighborhood around 3:30 p.m., late enough that the majority of working professionals were still at their jobs, but early enough that students had not yet been released from school. My house appeared completely normal from the street, the exact white two-story colonial residence with dark blue shutters where I had supposedly lived for 7 years. Miss Albright parked discreetly 2 houses away, and we approached on foot, both of us intensely scanning the exterior for any sign that my parents were home. The driveway was empty, and the windows were dark, though that offered no conclusive confirmation. I used my key to unlock the front door, and the immediate, familiar scent of home washed over me like a physical blow, the delicate fragrance of lavender air freshener, the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee, and the lingering presence of my father's distinct cologne. Everything in the entry foyer looked precisely as I had left it that morning when I quickly grabbed toast and my backpack and ran for the school bus. Nothing suggested an impending crisis, a serious threat, or parents actively planning a murder-suicide. I nearly laughed at the pure absurdity of our mission, committing a potential felony inside my own home to uncover evidence of a threat that probably existed only in Ms. Albright's stressed imagination. But Miss Albright gently touched my shoulder and subtly directed my attention upstairs, where Eliza's room waited. Locked, untouched, and utterly forbidden. We ascended the staircase quietly, utilizing a stealth born of paranoia, even though the house was clearly vacant. Eliza's door was secured by a heavy, keyed lock that my parents had installed shortly after her death, an unusually robust security measure for an interior door. I quickly entered my parents' bedroom and located the spare key nestled inside Mom's jewelry box, exactly where I remembered seeing it years before. The key turned smoothly, and Eliza's door swung inward, revealing a bedroom perfectly preserved in time. Her small bed remained unmade from the morning she died. Her casual clothing was still scattered carelessly on the carpeted floor, her colorful drawings meticulously taped to the walls. But there was a striking new addition that instantly turned my blood icy cold. Resting upon her bed was a pristine white dress, sized perfectly for a 7-year-old, carefully arranged as if Eliza were moments away from wearing it. Adjacent to it lay a significantly larger white dress, precisely my size, featuring a small, folded note fastened to the chest in my mother's familiar handwriting. Miss Albright gently lifted the note with shaking fingers and read the contents aloud. Asterisk, my dearest girls, I understand you cannot grasp this now, but soon you will. We are finally going to be completely together again, all of us. Exactly how destiny intended. No more agonizing pain. No more paralyzing grief. No more living in this broken, fractured reality without Eliza. Please put on your dress, Hannah. We will be seeing your sister today, and then we will all experience happiness again. Mom. Asterisk. The room violently spun around me, and I gripped the door frame to steady myself against the impending darkness. Miss Albright was right. My parents were indeed planning the precise horror she had feared. My mother had purchased a shroud, a white dress for me to die in, and laid it out next to Eliza's, treating the impending tragedy like a macabre family reunion. The unsettlingly casual, loving tone of the note, the way it normalized murder-suicide as if it were a mandatory family outing, was infinitely more chilling than any explicit threat could have been. Ms. Albright quickly took multiple photos of everything with her phone, systematically documenting the dresses, the chilling note, and the entire preserved room. "This is sufficient," she declared, her voice trembling but resolute. "This is undeniable evidence of immediate danger. We must get directly to the police station right now and present this proof before your parents arrive home and attempt to enact their final plan." But I wasn't looking at the dresses. I was transfixed by something else resting on Eliza's antique dresser, a thick photo album I had absolutely never encountered before. I picked it up with intensely trembling hands and slowly opened the cover. The first pages contained photos of a family I recognized, but simultaneously did not recognize. The same mother and father, identified in the captions by different names, Daniel and Sharon Kessler, with their daughters Eliza and Clara. Pictures of birthday celebrations, beach holidays, perfectly ordinary family moments. Pictures of me, except the captions named me Clara. I looked subtly different, less self-assured, wearing clothes I couldn't recall ever owning. I flipped relentlessly through page after page, watching Clara Kessler's childhood unfold in a series of images I had no conscious memory of, yet should have remembered if they genuinely represented my past life. Then, the photos terminated abruptly. The last image in the album displayed Clara at approximately age 10, seated in a bedroom that definitely wasn't her room in our current house, staring directly at the camera with an expression difficult to decipher, perhaps fear, perhaps resignation. Beneath the photograph, my mother had scrawled in careful, deliberate cursive, asterisk, Clara's final day with us. May she eventually forgive us for the necessary actions we had to take. Asterisk. Ms. Albright read the inscription over my shoulder, and I heard her sharp, painful intake of breath. What does that cryptic statement mean? What actions did they take? I couldn't form an answer, feeling completely overwhelmed by the terrible implications. Whatever fate had befallen Clara Kessler was now definitively coming for Hannah Hayes. Maybe Clara hadn't simply disappeared. Maybe she had been forcibly transformed into someone new. Her original identity erased or aggressively suppressed, her personality meticulously reconstructed as the healthy, adjusted Hannah Hayes. But why would they attempt such a desperate, enormous reinvention? Did they genuinely believe they had saved me by erasing me? My phone remained powered off, but Ms. Albright's phone suddenly rang, the sound shrill and deafeningly loud in the silent house. She glanced at the screen, and her face went paper white. "It is the police. They know we are here," she answered with a visibly shaking hand. I heard Detective Quinn's booming voice on the other end, demanding our immediate location and sternly insisting Ms. Albright was escalating the crisis by continuing to separate me from my legal guardians. She desperately attempted to explain the dresses, the note, the tangible evidence of intent to harm, but he instantly cut her off with authoritative language about custody rights, proper reporting channels, and the requirement to report immediately. "We must escape this house right now," Ms. Albright hissed, gripping my arm tightly. But loud footsteps thudding on the front porch halted both of us instantly. The front door creaked open, and my father's concerned voice called out, "Hannah, are you home, sweetheart?" His tone was gentle, exactly the sound of a truly worried parent. But I couldn't shake the image of that chilling note on the dress, the strange photos of Clara Kessler, and the subtle, ongoing ways he'd been saying his final goodbyes all week. Ms. Albright pulled me forcefully into Eliza's walk-in closet, and we pressed ourselves against the back wall, hidden behind hanging clothes that still retained the faint, sweet scent of my dead sister's laundry detergent. Through the narrow gap between the closet door slats, I watched my father step into the room. He stopped dead when he saw the two white dresses spread across the bed. The album lay open on the floor where I had dropped it. His controlled expression immediately dissolved into something profound, a combination of anguish and fatalistic resignation. "Carolyn!" he called out, his voice hollow. My mother's quick footsteps pounded up the stairs. She appeared in the doorway and instantly perceived the disturbed room, the blatant evidence that an intruder had been present. "She's been inside Eliza's room," Dad repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "She found the dresses." Mom clapped both hands over her mouth and began weeping uncontrollably, deep, racking sobs that convulsed her entire body. "It's too premature. We haven't adequately prepared her. She isn't emotionally ready to comprehend the whole truth." Dad embraced Mom, holding her tightly while she cried, and I observed them from the closet, feeling utterly detached, like I was observing two unfamiliar strangers. "Perhaps this development is for the best," Dad said quietly. "Perhaps it is finally time we disclose the entire truth about everything. About Clara, about the actions we took, about why we felt compelled to start life anew. She deserves the full story before we execute the next, final step." Mom pulled away, furiously wiping her tear-streaked eyes. "Where is she right now? We must find her before the police intervene, before anyone else poisons her mind with malicious ideas about us being a threat. She needs to hear this comprehensive truth only from us." Dad pulled out his cell phone and initiated a call, speaking in hushed tones I couldn't discern. When he ended the conversation, his expression was grim. Detective Quinn confirmed they tracked her phone's signal to this immediate vicinity, but the signal terminated moments ago. He is dispatching units to check the school and the homes of her friends. He believes her teacher has taken her somewhere, convincing her we pose some kind of danger. "That woman doesn't grasp anything," Mom declared, a new edge of hysteria entering her voice. "She doesn't understand the hardships we endured, the profound sacrifices we made to ensure both our girls were safe. If she successfully removes Hannah from us, if they place her into the social services system, then everything we did will have been entirely futile. Clara's sacrifice will have been meaningless." I gasped silently at the usage of the word sacrifice. Whatever outcome had befallen Clara Kessler had not been a simple, benign identity modification or participation in a witness protection program. It had involved a profound sacrifice, an act my parents clearly rationalized as tragically necessary. Ms. Albright's grip on my hand in the darkness tightened until it was actively painful. But I remained absolutely frozen, unable to utter a sound while my parents stood only 10 feet away, openly debating the fate of the daughter they had meticulously erased. Dad sat heavily on Eliza's bed, unintentionally crushing the fragile white dresses beneath his weight without seeming to notice the fabric. "Maybe we should just disclose everything to the authorities. Maybe it's time we fully accept the consequences for what we did 7 years ago. We have been running and hiding for 7 years, and observe the result. One daughter tragically deceased, one daughter living in terror of us, living under fabricated names, perpetually afraid of exposure. This isn't the life we promised Clara we would construct. Mom whirled on him with a sudden, blazing fury. We did precisely what was required to shield Hannah from the exact fate that would have consumed Clara. You know exactly what would have occurred had we remained put. If we had allowed the system to process her as they intended, she would either be dead, permanently institutionalized, or medicated beyond recognition. We saved her by becoming new people, by granting her a legitimate chance at a normal, healthy existence as Hannah Hayes. Do not you dare suggest that monumental choice was wrong. The fractured pieces of the puzzle began violently coalescing into a coherent, horrifying image. Clara Kessler had been afflicted, disabled, or deemed different, in a way that drove my parents to the desperate measure of faking her death or disappearance and meticulously restructuring her identity as the outwardly healthy, normal Hannah Hayes. They had relocated across multiple states, adopted new identities, and manufactured an entire fictitious history to provide their compromised daughter a supposedly clean start. When Eliza died 4 years into that new existence, the magnitude of the grief shattered my mother's careful structure of delusions, leading her to believe the only possible correction was to reunite her fragmented family in death. A phone rang, and Dad answered, his expression dramatically shifting as he listened intently. "The police units are 2 minutes away," he told Mom urgently. "We have to make a decision right now. Do we confess everything and hope they exhibit mercy, or do we adhere to the original plan and finalize what we initiated?" Mom looked down at the white dresses crumpled beneath Dad on the bed, and her face hardened into absolute, cold determination. "We finish it. We bring both our girls back together. It is the only way left to truly make this right." Miss Albright's phone was still recording the entire exchange. It was capturing my parents' full, devastating confession to whatever grave crime they had committed 7 years prior, and whatever new, murderous plan they were finalizing right now. But none of that evidentiary value mattered if we couldn't successfully escape this closet alive. If we couldn't flee before my parents found us and executed their twisted plan to reunite their daughters through death. I could clearly hear the sirens wailing in the distance, rapidly growing louder. I prayed intensely that the police would arrive before my parents discovered our hiding spot. Dad stood up and walked directly toward the closet door. "Caroline, search in here. If she came looking for the dresses, she might still be hiding nearby." His hand reached deliberately for the closet door handle. Miss Albright immediately shoved me further behind her, placing her entire body between me and my father. The door swung abruptly open. Dad's eyes immediately met mine through the protective barrier of hanging clothing. For an agonizing, stretched moment, no one moved. Then his formidable expression crumbled into raw devastation. "Clara," he whispered, utilizing the name I did not recognize as my own. "You weren't meant to discover this way. We intended to explain everything thoroughly, to help you comprehend why we did what we had to do." Mom appeared instantly beside him and saw me huddled in the closet, saw Miss Albright actively shielding me with her body. Her face cycled rapidly through shock and profound betrayal before settling on something disturbingly close to relief. "It's acceptable," she said softly, her voice dangerously calm. "You don't need to conceal yourself any longer. You don't have to pretend to be Hannah. You are free to revert to being Clara, our authentic daughter, and then we can finally all be together again." Her words felt nonsensical until they suddenly clicked into horrifying focus. She wasn't seeing me as Hannah, the girl who used to be Clara. She was seeing me as Clara, actively pretending to be Hannah, as if the last 7 years had been nothing but a prolonged, convincing act I was performing. The delusion was breathtakingly complete, so utterly divorced from reality that I instantly realized my mother was broken in ways that were fundamentally irreparable. Miss Albright stepped fully out of the closet, her phone held aloft, still recording. "Mr. and Mrs. Kessler, I am documenting every word you have spoken. Law enforcement is imminent, and they will see the undeniable evidence of your plans to severely harm Hannah. You must immediately distance yourselves from us and allow us to leave without any further incident." Dad emitted a bitter, humorless laugh. "You fail to grasp the core issue. We are not the villains you imagine. We were fighting desperately to save our daughter from a system intent on destroying her. By faking her tragic death and assigning her a new identity? Ms. Albright retorted forcefully. By plotting to murder her alongside yourselves in some warped fantasy reunion with your deceased child? That act is not saving anyone, sir. That is murder-suicide rooted in dangerous, delusional thinking. Mom violently lunged toward Ms. Albright. I screamed, the sound ripping from my throat, raw and paralyzing with terror. Dad instinctively grabbed Mom, pulling her back forcefully while Ms. Albright shoved me hard toward the bedroom door. We scrambled for the stairs, my parents shouting incoherent, frantic words behind us, words that my panic-flooded system couldn't process. The front door burst inward, and police officers swarmed the entry hall, weapons drawn, their voices authoritative, commanding everyone to get down, to raise their hands, to remain still. I collapsed onto the stairs, watching the officers surround my parents, watching them be physically forced to the ground and handcuffed, while they continued desperately calling me Clara and insisting their actions were born entirely of love. Detective Quinn approached where Ms. Albright and I were huddled on the steps, both of us shaking uncontrollably from adrenaline and shock. He looked at Ms. Albright with a newfound, grudging respect. We received the live audio recording from your phone through the continuous 911 line you maintained. We now possess sufficient evidence to charge them with conspiracy to commit murder, severe child endangerment, and whatever the hell they executed 7 years ago when they fabricated their daughter's death and assumed entirely new identities. Ms. Albright showed him the photos of the dresses, the chilling note, and the album documenting Clara Kessler's childhood. The irrefutable evidence of a systematic plan culminating in murder-suicide. Detective Quinn's expression darkened visibly as he reviewed the documentation. Jesus Christ, you were completely correct about every detail. He looked at me with an expression bordering on pity. We are going to need time to definitively determine who you are. Whether you are truly Hannah Hayes, or Clara Kessler, or possibly some combination of the two. This will require detailed medical records, thorough forensic identity analysis, and probably an extensive psychiatric evaluation. This is going to be a protracted, difficult process. I couldn't focus on process or analysis. I could only focus on my parents being physically escorted out in handcuffs, still calling me Clara, still vehemently insisting they had only acted out of absolute, profound love. Ms. Albright gently placed her arm around my trembling shoulders, and I leaned heavily into her stabilizing presence, this woman who had risked absolutely everything on an educated hunch, simply because she refused to allow herself to fail another student. What happens to me moving forward? I asked, my voice small and utterly lost. For tonight, Detective Quinn responded, you will be placed in protective custody until we can ascertain if you possess any other verifiable family members. Long term, he trailed off, clearly uncertain, that hinges entirely on what we uncover regarding your true identity and historical background. But the single most important thing is that you are safe now. The word safe felt hopelessly inadequate for this complex situation where my entire foundational identity was suddenly debatable, where the parents who had raised me were arrested for planning my murder, and where I might not even be the person I believe myself to be. The comprehensive investigation required 3 agonizing months to fully unravel the truth. What the authorities discovered was significantly worse than even Ms. Albright had dared to suspect. Clara Kessler hadn't been sick or disabled. She had been the sole witness to a violent crime. She had witnessed her father kill a stranger in a brutal road rage incident when she was 10 years old. The state prosecutor intended for her to testify, but my parents decided they could not permit her to be traumatized by the grueling trial process. They couldn't allow her exposure to intense media scrutiny and complex psychological evaluation. So, they made her officially disappear, staging a convincing kidnapping that remained unsolved while they fled the state, armed with entirely new identities. They systematically convinced Clara, through a calculated combination of emotional manipulation and targeted medication, that she had always been Hannah Hayes, that Clara Kessler was simply a frightening nightmare, and that this new life was her only true reality. When Eliza died 4 years later, the crushing grief finally fractured my mother's careful structure of delusions, leading her to conclude that the only way to fully fix everything was to reunite her fragmented family in death. Grasping this complete, horrific truth demolished everything I thought I understood about myself. I spent countless weeks in mandatory therapy sessions, desperately struggling to separate genuine memories from implanted ones, trying to define who Clara had been versus the person Hannah had eventually become. Eventually, I reached a difficult conclusion. I was both, yet neither simultaneously. I was a person irrevocably forged from overwhelming trauma and deliberate lies, but still fundamentally whole. Still intensely deserving of the life my parents had attempted to steal from me twice over. Ms. Albright officially lost her established teaching position due to the kidnapping charge. Despite being definitively proven correct about the imminent danger, she faced serious charges that were eventually reduced to a suspended sentence, based entirely on the irrefutable evidence that she had saved my life. 6 months after the arrests, she became my official legal guardian through a complex legal process that felt deeply appropriate, given she was the only adult brave enough and reckless enough to fully protect me. My parents are currently serving sentences of 25 years to life for conspiracy to commit murder, massive identity fraud, and the death of the man my father killed 7 years ago. I chose to retain the name Hannah because Clara feels like a person who tragically died when she was 10. But I visit my father's victim's grave every single year on the anniversary of his death and quietly inform him that someone remembers exactly what happened. Ms. Albright, I now call her, and often reminds me that true healing is not a linear journey, but we are slowly constructing something genuinely real from the complete wreckage of my past, one honest day at a time. Trust is born when logic fails. Some families are built, some are made, and some are forged in the aftermath of being almost entirely destroyed, solely by trusting the one person who believed you were truly worth saving. If you enjoyed hearing the profound intensity of this survival story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Reddit Chronicles. Let me know your own deepest take on this family's decisions in the comments below.